we are not anti-vax at this show. We are anti-mandate, right? And that is supposed to be the lefty position. And Dr. Richard Wolff tweeted this out yesterday, and it made some news. It says it's not pro versus anti-vaccine. The issue is class struggle. Have employers' dictates, mandates become intolerable for employees? Record job quitting, plus strikes, plus refusals of mass vaccine mandates? Say yes. So I just want to remind everybody that Dr. Richard Wolff is standing on very solid ground when he says this, because this is Dr. Fauci when he was first asked about mandates last year, about 12 months ago.
And do you foresee that the vaccine might be mandated for any populations, perhaps for school-age children?
No, I don't think you'll ever see a mandating of vaccine, particularly for the general public. Sometimes in the health sector, like in my hospital here at NIH, you're not going to be allowed to go on the ward unless you get a flu vaccine. But you would never mandate, at least I do not think you would. I'd be pretty surprised if you mandated it for any element of the general public.
Now, as a primary care physician myself, who's had many conversations around vaccine safety with patients, I'm curious, what's our contingency plan for people who might refuse the vaccine?
Well, I mean, they have every right to refuse vaccine. I don't think you need a contingency plan. If someone refuses the vaccine in the general public, then there's nothing you can do about that. You cannot force someone to take a vaccine.
Right.
Okay, that was Dr. Fauci a year ago. Here's also Nancy Pelosi a year ago.
So here's the thing. We cannot require someone to be vaccinated. That's just not what we can do. It is a matter of privacy to know who is or who isn't.
So it seems like Dr. Fauci and Nancy Pelosi are talking about a principle. And those are the principles that lefties are supposed to be adhering to. And so that's not about, well, if the science changes, then we can mandate. That's not what they're saying at all. They're saying, no, you can't do this as a matter of principle. Joe Biden was also asked last year when he was president-elect, are you going to enforce mandates? And here's what he says. Are you going to enforce mandates?
No, I don't think it should be mandatory. I wouldn't demand to be mandatory, but I would do everything in my power. Just like I don't think masks have to be made mandatory nationwide.
But now people are thinking differently. This is from the ACLU. It says, far from compromising them, vaccine mandates actually further civil liberties. They protect the most vulnerable people with disabilities and fragile immune systems, children too young to be vaccinated, and communities of color hit hard by the disease. Now, what is the argument against that? Well, first of all, it's funny that they put liberty and mandate in one sentence. That's very funny. And Robert Malone, who invented the mRNA vaccine technology, retweeted that and said, war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. But here's the argument against what the ACLU just said. The argument, coronavirus immunity passports are not the answer. A system of immunity passports in the United States threatens to exacerbate racial disparities and harm the civil liberties of all. Any immunity passport system endangers privacy rights by creating a new surveillance infrastructure to collect health data. An immunity passport system would divide workers into two classes, the immune and the non-immune, and the latter might never be eligible for a given job short of contracting and surviving COVID-19 if an immune worker is available to take the slot. Given the lack of scientific support for reliable immunity determinations, no significant policy decisions should currently be made on the basis of presumed immunity. There are better ways to both advance public health and protect individual rights that we should focus on in order to emerge from this crisis without creating a new privacy invasive data infrastructure that threatens everyone's rights. And who said this? Who was giving the counter narrative, the argument against the ACLU? Well, it turns out it was the ACLU. So that's what the ACLU used to always think, like all lefties think. But now everybody's changed their mind. From Fauci to Pelosi to Biden to the goddamn ACLU, which we know turned into a bunch of shit libs and because of Trump. So guess what? Why do you have a vaccine mandate if the vaccines no longer prevent transmission? So you're going to get, as Andy Slavitt, the COVID director, said, everyone's going to get COVID. You can't get away from it. It's like the flu. You can't get rid of the flu. You can't get rid of COVID. And the vaccine no longer prevents transmission. That's according to the CDC. Now, you tell me what the rationale for mandates are. It's not about health, because vaccines protect the person who got the vaccine. It no longer protects the person who didn't. So if you need the vaccine, you should get the vaccine, because it will protect you from serious illness and hospitalization, but it will no longer prevent you from transmitting it. So a mandate to get a vaccine to protect other people is anti-science. And they're doing it. 9,000 New York workers leave as a vaccine mandate takes effect. So those are cops, those are medics, those are EMT, those are firemen. Nurses are in short supply. Employers worry vaccine mandate could make it worse. Chicago school bus drivers quit in droves. Over the 10% of their bus drivers quit. Those are blue-collar workers of color. Workers rally against New York Presbyterian's COVID vaccine mandate for staff. And by the way, only 20%, 80% of the young black New Yorkers are vaccinated. So this is who this is a war on, young people of color. Everybody thinks it's dunking on Trumpers, but it's also dunking on the most vulnerable workers in our society. Here's the New York governor orders National Guard to fill New York hospital shortages caused by staffers not vaccinated against COVID. You're firing healthcare workers in the middle of a pandemic. I don't think this is about health. And you're replacing them with National Guard, who also are not mandated to be vaccinated until June 2022. Did you know that? That half the National Guard aren't vaccinated and they don't have to be mandated until June 2022. So this isn't about health. Black Lives Matter of Greater New York blast the vaccine mandates as racist and disrespectful. Is he a Trumper? Richard Wolff says it's not pro versus anti-vaccine. The issue is class struggle. Have employers' mandates become intolerable for employees? Record job quitting, strikes, refusals of max vaccine mandates say yes. Anti-mandate movement is not all right wing or anti-vax. Its labor militancy component deserves interest and support. It's an important opportunity to fight the right and build the left. So and by the way, let me just to drive this point home, you're going to mandate somebody who already had COVID get a vaccine, even though they have greater immunity than the vaccine provides? This was asked to Dr. Fauci by Dr. Sanjay Gupta.
There was a study that came out of Israel about natural immunity, and basically the headline was that natural immunity provides a lot of protection, even better than the vaccines alone. What are people to make of that? So as we talk about vaccine mandates, I get calls all the time. People say, I've already had COVID, I'm protected, and now the study says maybe even more protected than the vaccine alone. Should they also get the vaccine? How do you make the case to them?
You know, that's a really good point, Sanjay. I don't have a really firm answer for you on that.
Okay. All right. So now you know this mandate is complete bullshit and has nothing to do with health. He doesn't even have an answer for a question he knew was coming because there isn't an answer for it. But he is captured. You know what regulatory capture means? That's what this guy is. He's the poster boy of it. So now let me bring in Dr. Richard Wolff. Always happy to talk to him. He's the host of YouTube show, The Economic Update, Democracy at Work, author of many books, including his most recent, The System is the Sickness, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. Pleased to have with us Professor Richard Wolff. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Jimmy. Glad to be here. So
now how would you respond to the what you just saw here and the pushback you got from just saying that? Explain to people how about this is about class struggle.
Okay, I'd be glad to. I think the way to start is to recognize and to applaud, at least if you come from the political directions that you and I share, Jimmy, that there is a kind of rising of working people that we haven't seen in a long time. The government keeps these statistics about people who quit. We are having record numbers of American workers, many of them returning to jobs after the pandemic and taking a long, hard look at that job and coming to the conclusion, if I can quote from a country and western song from a few years ago, you can take this job and shove it. And that's what they're figuring out. Now, it's not the best moment. It's a risk they take. Jobs are scarce. But you know, when people have had it, when it has built up for too long and it's too strong, they may not choose the best moment, but they said, I'm out of here. I'm not going to be treated like this anymore. Number one. Number two, we're seeing a strike wave, the likes of which we haven't seen for a long time. You know, Kellogg, Nabisco, John Deere, there's a whole bunch of them, and many that we don't even know about that are smaller and don't get coverage. But I want to make a point about that. It is getting more coverage than labor struggles used to get. Yes. It's almost as though people in the media all over the place smell or sense that something is going on. And so for me, when I watch the working people that I know saying, I don't want to be mandated, I understand that it's mostly not about the details of the science. They're not familiar with all of that. It's not about that they don't believe in vaccines. They've been vaccinating themselves and their children for a long time, and it's a normal procedure of life. But they don't want to be told again what they must do by pharmaceutical companies and government bureaucrats for whom they have lost what little respect they had. And so they're pushing back. And if they don't get a vaccine, I think that's a shame. I'm vaccinated. I'm glad I'm vaccinated. I understand your position about it as well. But I don't see this as an issue so much of science or of what the CDC says. This is a movement that the left should be in there saying, you're right to be angry at mandates. That didn't have to be done. There's 100 ways you can organize to talk about and to work out procedures, have your different scientific points of view presented in a rational way, and then make a democratic decision that allows people the personal and private decisions they want to make. The rest is a scare campaign, and I've seen them before, and the ultimate objective in my mind is to reestablish the ability of those who like to give other people mandates with a position to do so, and I don't think the left belongs there. Last point. I know the people on the right wingers and all, they want to get in on this too. They would like to move the anti-mandate movement in their direction. Yes. I get that. They want to do that. Yes. We should be in there saying, no, you don't have to go in that direction. No. You don't have to be an anti-vaxxer. You don't have to. This is not necessary. You can take that impulse, that feeling, and join with other people to change the system that oppresses you, and not to get lost in some detail of science and medicine that really isn't the issue for us at this time.
So, well, very well said. So you don't even need the fact that a mandate is you don't even need that argument, is what you're saying. And you're saying that it's a blunder of the left to cede this argument, this cause, over to people to the right, and then people will suck people because they're the only ones talking about it. I cannot, right. Richard, yours was the first critique I have found of any of the establishment COVID narrative policy from the left perspective. I've been the only one out there that I know of on the left giving an actual critique, with Max Blumenthal, from the left. And also we had on Michael Tracy. And from the left, and no one else seems to say. It's the same people who were telling you the truth about Russiagate, the same people who were telling you the truth about Syria, Venezuela. Those are the same handful of people who are telling you the truth now, giving you a critique anyway. At least there's a critique from the left on the establishment policy surrounding COVID and mandates. And I think, your credentials are impeccable, and you make the great argument that we cannot cede this to the right wing. And you do not have to push people away. I make the scientific argument that it's ridiculous. You're making the lefty critique that it divides class and it divides workers, and we shouldn't let this happen.
No, it's even stronger. It takes workers who are becoming militant, critics of the job situation, critics of the way they're treated on the job and by the government that the corporations control anyway. These people are beginning to move in quitting and striking. We should be in there. We should be applauding what they are doing. Sure, people make mistakes all the time, but I'll use your language, Jimmy. We're ceding it to the right. If we allow the liberals and the others to collapse the people fighting against a mandate as if they were all people who were, against vaccines for anybody out of some abstract notion of science that isn't supported. That's not necessary. We can be pro-vax, and you've done that well, without being pro-mandate. By the way, the whole history of the labor movement is not to allow the employer to dictate to you what you are going to do. And, I'm the person who believes that the majority of people have an interest in not letting that happen. Do I always agree with the target? No, and it doesn't matter. This is where people feel strongly right now. Just like those who are quitting feel strongly about why they quit, and those who are striking feel strongly. And that militancy and that criticism of how they are treated, that's a flower to be nurtured on the left, not to be dropped into a bucket as if it's undistinguishable from all of the rest of the right wing. And by the way, when anyone says that, you're doing the job of the right wing. You're helping cement an alliance between them and this labor militancy. And man, that is politically stupid.
So what do you say to people? I've seen Keith Olbermann tweet out when the policemen, firemen, and paramedics were marching on the Brooklyn Bridge. He tweeted out, fire them all. Same thing with teachers. They were like, hey, we got teachers who are they don't want to get the vax, fire them. Hey, we've got nurses that don't want to get the vax, fire them. What do you say to that? That to me is just so chilling.
Yeah, for me, it's a kind of a tragic slippage of these people. And I'm trying to be polite, but there's a tragic slippage of these people into reinforcing the very authoritarian hierarchy that we ought to be critics of. This is a system that really didn't do a good job. I mean, the most important historical fact here is this one. The United States has 4.5% of the world's population and 20% of the world's COVID deaths. The establishment that ran this program is a failure.
Yes.
And a failure is not the one you put in a position to be ordering everybody else around. I mean, we could be saying this without allowing anyone to portray us as being against a vaccine. I have 2 kids. They were vaccinated when they were born. The doctors told me this is important. Smallpox, I don't remember them all, whooping cough. We do that. We've been doing, I don't want to be put in that box. That is misrepresenting us, but that does the work of the right wing, and I think we should be very, very cautious about that, to say the least.
Well, I really appreciate you saying all that. That's 100% right. They'll mandate a vaccine, but they won't mandate you get health care if you get sick from the virus or the vaccine. They won't mandate that you have health care. And we now know, due to studies, that when they did the study, 600,000 people in the United States had died from COVID. And they determined that a third of those people, 200,000 of them, would still be alive if the establishment, the oligarchy, the government would have given them Medicare for all. We now know that universal health care would have saved 200,000 people's lives, and they never talk about that. When Fauci talks about how to save lives, he never brings up universal health care, ever. So you want to give those people the authoritarian power to dictate to workers, and they've already failed us. That's exactly right. Oh my God, you said it so perfectly.
Let's remember one little additional point, Jimmy. We've been closing hospitals in this country for decades.
Yes.
We've been closing them because of some stupid notion that this is quote unquote efficient. Well, you have to be a ghoul to have saved that money at the expense of the hundreds of thousands of lives, not just from COVID, but from God knows what other diseases that weren't handled properly because we didn't have the facilities in place. You're right. That's the mandate that might be arguably something for the good of the people. But that the government, having messed up on this COVID on a scale that's beyond words, on a pharmaceutical industry that only went to work on the vaccines when it was made a riskless, profitable venture by government contracts given in advance. Wow. And then to say they can mandate this one thing and not deal with all the rest of the problems. I mean, really, it pushes you to wonder the folks that fall into that trap. And my hope is that people will see through it and understand that the argument about a vaccine is a different matter from the argument about allowing the corporate elite and the government bureaucrats to be mandating to all of us what we must and must not do, especially if the scientific questions are still open about whether it makes any sense on top of it.
Especially. And we've detailed that at this show. And the most recent year-long study revealed that vaccinated people are just as likely to spread the virus as the unvaccinated. The difference was negligible, 13% difference, which is nothing. So the conclusion of the study was everybody's going to get friggin' COVID. And not that study. Andy Slavitt said that. That's, by the way, accepted by all scientists now. They just don't broadcast that on CNN and MSNBC on a nightly basis, that everybody's going to get COVID. But Andy Slavitt, Joe Biden's director for COVID response, tweeted out, everybody's going to get it because the Delta variant is, and the vaccines don't protect against the Delta variant, even the boosters. They just make it so that you don't get serious illness or have to go to the hospital, which is what those vaccines do. So now even the CDC director admits it no longer prevents transmission. So you've got it right from the lefty perspective, and you've got it right from a scientific perspective. There's no reason to be for this unless you're an authoritarian who likes to cede power to the oligarchy. That's the only reason. So, by the way, the oligarchy that has already failed our COVID response. I want to let you know, on November 6th, we're going to be in Baltimore. November 11th, we're in Tempe, Arizona. November 12th, we're doing Los Angeles and Studio City. November 19th, Los Angeles and Studio City. And then Thanksgiving weekend in Portland, Oregon. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all those tickets.